Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So we are back again with our year-end champion ranking series. Today we're going to be ranking science class. That means that after this we still have cosmic and mutant class left to rank, and then we're going to be going up to top 15 champions in the game overall, and then we're going to be doing a tier list update, and perhaps I have a little special surprise for you after that as well. Right, before we get into rest of the video, as always, the standard disclaimers. This video is meant to reflect my personal view of the game right now, not meant to be some sort of fact that you can use or anything of the sort. This is simply how I view the game currently. If I had to remake these videos a month, 2 months from now, I'm quite sure that I would shift some champions in some positions. I'd exclude some champions from the top 10 list, and I'd include some others, perhaps. And most importantly, remember that this is not me trying to insult your family's honor. If you disagree with me, I'm not trying to shake your beliefs or tell that you are wrong to dislike a certain champion. At the end of the day, you enjoy whichever champions you enjoy, and typically, naturally, people are drawn to value those champions higher if you actually enjoy them. And, we all have different views, goals, targets in the game, different gaming habits. Some champions fit our playstyles better, some champions fit our playstyles worse. And all of that undoubtedly affects how we view these champions and how we rank them. Fact of the matter is, there are no official statistics which ones are, the most used champions. There are no statistics which champions have the highest success rates when they are being used, and things like that. Right, so let's jump to Aunt May, where we have opened up science class. And as with every single class this time around, pretty much, it's increasingly harder and harder to do these rank up top 10 videos, because there are more and more champions that you want to include in the top 10. And this time I was struggling really, really hard. And I have like 2 champions in particular, if not more, that I did not manage to squeeze in the top 10 list that I personally absolutely love, and I wish I did. And I know a lot of you do as well. There's one special exclusion this year because it would be quite high fall. I believe last time I ranked She-Hulk in about 5th or 6th position. This time I left her out of top 10 list. She's still amazing. She's still great. I like her a lot, but I cannot ignore the fact that I have seen a lot less of her in pretty much every single aspect of the game. Facts are facts, and fact of the matter is that whatever people were using She-Hulk for these days, majority of the player base tends to kind of use different champions. It's a lot less that she's not capable of doing the things that she used to. It's more in a sense that she's just taking a bit of a back seat for a lot more newer and or popular options, which not always means that the other champions are better. It's just that means that, people tend to use other champions more. So She-Hulk's unfortunately not in the top 10 list, and I had to exclude Piggy as well. I really love Piggy. Piggy has grown on me a lot. If I were to rank, then Piggy would definitely be the 11th. I have currently rank 5-star Piggy. I recently duped my 6-star, and it's one of the champions I'm looking at as a potential next rank 3 candidate. Piggy has very effective, degeneration countering abilities, and still the best power things in the game, which I absolutely love about the character. There are obvious downsides of Spider-Ham as well. I really do enjoy, and I really tried hard to fit Spider-Ham in top 10. It kind of just didn't happen there. And then there are more standard exclusions this time around, like Red Hulk. Red Hulk still is incredibly powerful champion, especially with his compatibility to Hazard, Shift, Poison, and Incinerate nodes, and in general as a science champion that does not rely on debuffs, that actually can have very niche, good paths and uses in the game, because majority of the science champions quite heavily do rely on the debuffs. And then we have Joe Fixit, who recently received a buff, and I don't doubt the fact that in 6 months he might make it top 10. So far as I have been using him, I have been liking him more and more, but I can't just, squeeze him in top 10 as quickly as, he has only been buffed for like a month. And then we have Overseer, who is, I think, also quite underrated champion by a lot of people. I think he's better than many people think. I think he has plenty of good qualities, and I think he's, potent champion. I happen to enjoy him as well myself. I wish his ramp up was quicker in majority of the circumstances, but there are plenty of things that I do like about the character. Right, now then, let's start the actual top 10. And in the spot number 10, we have the Thing. Now, my personal value of Thing and appreciation has kind of shifted significantly over time. Initially, obviously, everybody looked glass-eyed as him as one of the best science champions, and he was. And then, his use kind of dropped, and then eventually kind of picked back up. But I do think he is extremely solid addition to science class. I do think that signature ability is practically mandatory to kind of like get the full benefit and full experience of how it is to use Thing. Some of the coolest things is that he actually is making his way back into Alliance War meta as well, because of those combat counter, whatever those nodes, strike counter fury nodes, for instance, where we have strike counter fury there, he can basically go absolutely immortal. That definitely has been helping him. Additional side note is that on the next Alliance War season and currently on the new Alliance War map, we have Hazard Shift, Bleed, and Shock node coming up, and he's just one of those champions that naturally fits perfectly because he is bleed immune, because he is shock immune, and that will inevitably mean that we will see people use Thing for Alliance War Path 9 Section 2 because of those abilities. Other than that, an important thing to note that he's pretty much the original Nullify immune champion in the game, because he's immune to Shattered, Nullify, Stagger, and Fate Seal effects. And that is becoming more and more important because we can see more buffet nodes being spammed still everywhere, and more nodes like Power Snack becoming more and more popular. And yeah, that is becoming more and more important. And it's very good to remember that Thing is basically the OG champion that was immune to Nullify and Fate Seal effects. Past that point, I wish he was quicker to play. I wish his damage ramp up was faster. I think 60 Tiny Furies is quite a long time to get to, and there are some upsides, there are some downsides using the Thing, and there is obviously the cheese that you can do with the champion as well, but that has kind of gone by the wayside for the most part. Also, in general, I just think he's a very, very good, solid champion that does unfortunately require quite a significant commitment with the Sig Stones to kind of get the full advantage of. I would often recommend people ranking, Spider-Ham or She-Hulk or Red Hulk or Joe Fixit even over Thing if you do not have the resources or the ability to commit the Thing with Signature Stones. But if you do like the champion, if you have the Signature Stones, definitely you can get your money's worth out of the Thing. For a while, he was one of my least used rank 3s, but recently that has started shifting. Therefore, I'm still keeping him in spot number 10. Spot number 9, and that's going to be a point where a lot of people who aren't necessarily mad at me already are going to be even more mad. It's going to be Immortal Abomination. I think Immortal Abomination got super hype when he got released, and a lot of people really kind of loved fussing about him. But again, fact of the matter is that he hasn't been that popular or that dominant. That's not to say that he's not good. It definitely is. He's a very powerful champion in the right situations. But there are, also the downsides to him. In general, I do like Immortal Abomination. I have rank 5 5-star. Recently duped 6-star. No, yeah, actually did dupe him recently. So there's a very good chance that he's going to go to rank 3 as well in the near future, as soon as I have done a couple more rank ups. And obviously, the acid burn damage can be absolutely crazy. The one kind of like the bigger downside that has been showcased in a ton of videos is that he actually does take quite a while to get going. And believe it or not, he has a really low damage output in any of the, shorter to moderate length fights. He's also, relatively Liquid Courage Double Edge friendly, which is a very good thing for a science champion. Unfortunately, that Liquid Courage Double Edge friendliness doesn't really kick in until, you are quite deep into the fight. So for a lot of stuff like map 7, it's not the best idea to run him with Liquid Courage Double Edge, and I speak that from experience. I had Recoil Mastery Zone, I brought in Immortal Abomination, and I still ended up losing 5 to 10% pretty much every fight I brought him in, just because you finish the fights quite quickly. he does manage to recover all of his health, in longer fights, but in shorter fights, he still ends up with net loss typically. Things that I like the most actually about Immortal Abomination is the fact that you can easily spam your Petrify effect. It's not the strongest Petrify, it's only 20%, but combined with the poisons and despair, you still can reverse regeneration, reduce power gain effectiveness, and things like that. And I also like the fact that you place weakness debuffs every time opponent strikes your block. It's very useful with some nodes, and with many nodes, it's actually just the fact that you are able to place additional debuff on the opponent is what is super helpful. So in general, I think he's a wonderful champion. I think initially he might have gotten, a bit too much credit given to his name. I think now he has kind of stabilized. I do still think him as a top 10 science champion, and that this is where I rank him. And it's, again, one of the champions that I definitely look at potentially to rank up in future. Well, spot number 8 now. Spot number 8 is going to go to Miles Morales. I think Miles is awesome. I think Miles is becoming more and more useful, and Miles's relevance in the game depends on what Kabam does. Kind of like much more with champions like Immortal Abomination and things like that. If Kabam keeps spamming unblockable in every other quest, next champion rank up, Miles might even make it further. If Kabam stops spamming unblockable in every single quest, it's possible that Miles will be out of top 10 science list, in very near future. Because how relevant, how important this champion is largely does depend on that one thing that he does best in the game, which is deal with champions that are unblockable. Now, luckily for us, Kabam's introducing more and more champions with unblockable special attacks and things like that, where Miles will always be useful in those matchups, even if there are no additional nodes, which can kind of solidify and stabilize Miles' position in the top 10. But at large, he really does depend on what kind of content is Kabam releasing. And I'm not saying that that is the only thing that Miles does. Obviously, it isn't. He still has access to Taunt with no cooldown timer. That is quite awesome. Access to Shock and Rupture debuffs and really weakness as well. So all of those things are nice. But none of those things would be good enough to have him be in this top 10. Realistically, if we take away that 100% chance to miss unblockable attacks, he would not be in this top 10. Therefore, his placement on these lists largely depends on how actively Kabam is spamming unblockable. And right now, they're spamming it everywhere. Spamming it in pretty much every new quest, every new map, and every new chapter of harder content. And it's quite important at this point that, higher tier accounts have access to Miles. If you don't have a 6-star, rank up a 5-star, and trust me, you will be happy that you did, because he can turn very hard, very tricky fights into laughable, easy, cheesable fights. And that grants ton of value to a champion. Just like everybody should have access to Ronan in order to stun lock, just how, most people should have access to, Dr. Octopus, for instance, to deal with improved power gain nodes and stuff like that. Most people should have access to Miles Morales, because he's best at what he does. Now we're going to move on to spot number 7. And in spot number 7, I'm going to be putting in iHulk. Now this again can be debatable placement, and it's very hard to distinguish where the enjoyment and fun and love for the character ends and where his practical utility starts. But I think we have seen significant enough of representation of iHulk on YouTube and some crazy solos, and he was one of the MVPs for Summer of Pain and things like that. Initially, everybody, myself included, was absolutely so harsh about iHulk, and I still wish that he would have, some slight tweaks in his kit. But over time, he has proved himself useful, and there is no denying it. He's one of the best kind of like nuke down champions when you just go balls to the wall. He can definitely nuke down very large health pools in, a single go with a level 2 followed up by a level 1. With level 1s, obviously, there is the RNG involved, unfortunately. But I think we see more and more people rank Immortal Hulk. We see more and more people use Immortal Hulk. And I hope that remains that way. You know, he has his utility bits. I think one of the most useful thing about Immortal Hulk is that his regeneration rate cannot be increased or decreased. So, and that means that he's immune to Spectre and plenty of other nodes that could potentially hinder you in many circumstances. I find that definitely kind of fairly unique, quite useful, but realistically, majority of his utility does lie on that huge burst of damage that you can deliver, kind of like just pushing opponents, you know, pacing against the wall. It's always an experience using Immortal Hulk. And I think at this point he deserves this spot. Again, if you disagree, that's fine. Immortal Hulk will never be everybody's cup of tea. If you do so decide, I can, you know, see where people don't think Immortal Hulk is worth top 10, and in which case you can squeeze up the bottom ones and include Spider-Ham in top 10. But I think he has deserved it by now. I think he has gotten some help from Kabam as well, undoubtedly, with, you know, very specific nodes that kind of like make it very easy to use Immortal Hulk, and whether it is to spam his level 2s and level 1s or what have you, he has definitely turned out to be quite node friendly. And that is, again, quite important. Like in a case with Miles, we have seen it many times before. For instance, with Silver Surfer, where Silver Surfer came, he was not necessarily looked at as something potentially useful, but due to the nodes that have been added to the contest, largely the energy adoption nodes and, you know, plenty more of similar nature, turns out that Silver Surfer is quite a useful champion. It's not necessarily that he has gotten any better since he got released, it's that he got a very suitable piece of content released to him. And those things do affect character value and character worth in the game. And Hulk has been one of those champions that has benefited from it quite significantly, in my opinion. And he continues to shine. And he's stupid fun. He really is stupid fun. Okay, let's move on to more serious numbers now. Spot number 6. Spot number 6 is Void. Void has been slowly but surely over the time lowering a bit in his rankings. Still a phenomenal champion. A lot of people have recently been asking me, is it worth to rank up Void? And the answer is yes. Void is still a great champion. Void can still deal with a ton of threats. Now, there might be champions that can deal with those things faster or, you know, differently or maybe more enjoyably. But fact of the matter is that Void is capable of answering a ton of problems. There are obvious downsides of Void, which, you know, to explain briefly, number one would be the reliance of RNG, which is quite frustrating at times when you need to reverse opponents. Well, healing is not that time sensitive most of the time, but reverse power gain, for instance, when you go in a matchup where opponent has a lot of ability power gain and you end up praying that you get that petrify or you're gonna eat a level 3 to the face. And that is a definite downside. Also, you know, his speed, he's not the quickest character. He can do a good amount of damage, but he takes a while to get going. And, you know, there are, you know, other downsides. We can't pretend that there are not. There are other champions that can do the things that Void does, you know, as good or quicker. But Void does a ton, and Void does it extremely reliably. And also, on top of that, you know, Void has his other charms, like his damage over time effects. Void still is Incinerate immune, and Void has plenty of other debuffs aside from that Petrify, like you reduce evade ability accuracy, you reduce opponent's critical rating, and Void being one of the largest helpful champions in the game can survive your scuff-ups quite often, and then you still have access to degeneration on Void as well, which can be quite important. All of that stuff adds up. All of that stuff counts. And Void is still, in my opinion, very valuable champion in Science class. He might not be end-all, be-all. You know, I do think that at this point, if you have not ranked up Void, but if you have ranked up, let's say, Mr. Fantastic and, you know, some other Science champions, you can get by without one. But if the question is whether it is worth to rank up Void, yes. As long as he's awakened and you are willing to give him signature stones, I think it is worth to rank up Void. Simple as that. Because he can still do a ton of awesome things. Let's move on. Spot number 5. Spot number 5 is going to be Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative has been increasingly dominant in the things that he does. And I was not going to place Mr. Negative as high as this. And that was one of the latter changes after I had already done the list, when I started crossing things out. And the reason why he went up by to spot number 5 is the fact that when he is awakened, he's the best counter to degeneration that we have in game. Not only in his base ability, he has the potential to completely reduce and degeneration damage, by 120% if opponent is suffering from 3 debuffs. And that's possible, but most of the time you're gonna have like 2 debuffs on opponent, let's say. So that alone is very potent way to deal with degeneration. But then if you do have your Mr. Negative awakened, you also gain a regeneration up to 1000 regen per tick if it's rank 3, but realistically, let's say 900 regen per second, which most often than not only covers the gap that you might be lacking from his first ability to counter degeneration, but often lets you heal a very good amount. And on top of that, you are immune to nullify, stagger, and fate seal effects, which again is still niche but increasingly important piece of utility. I like that for a science champion, Mr. Negative can easily access buffs as well by spamming his heavy attacks, especially if you do have that debuff on the opponent that reduces their delirium debuff that reduces their combat power rate. Then you can spam a ton of heavy attacks and you can benefit from that. And that is fairly rare for a science champion to have a buff available on demand. And also at the same time, he's the only champion that can get rid of buffs at his own convenience. We have 2 champions in the game that can never gain buff under any circumstances, but Mr. Negative is the only champion that can get rid of buffs without hitting the opponent, basically, or without having them expire. And there is quite a lot of versatility in that, and it's not just against nodes like Spite or whatever else you might need to counter. It is genuinely a helpful ability to get rid of that either dexterity or fury or whatever buffs you can gain from nodes at times, but as well. And yeah, Mr. Negative has plenty of good matchups. One thing that I'm not a fan of, one thing that I'm really not a fan of Mr. Negative is the light energy duration and the fact that he has so much damage placed on his level 2. And in the fights where you cannot properly ramp up your level 2 or where you cannot use your level 2, you can really feel the lack of damage. He does not have the best base damage. He does have good damage if you can drop a good level 2. That's pretty much all there is to it. But again, access to very potent petrify effects and ton of degeneration, has some more regen on his kit as well. I think as time goes by, as more people pay attention to Mr. Negative and learn how to use him and learn how to benefit from him, he's going to become more and more popular. Because there is a lot of unique utility in his kit, and a lot of it is useful day to day. For instance, he's one of the very few champions in the game that is actually capable of basically getting his level 2 off before opponent has had a chance to use special 1. And that is quite important in a ton of matchups where, a lot of problems often in a fight start when opponent uses their special attacks or something. The fact that Mr. Negative can get his level 2 and drop that massive level 2 before opponent has had a chance to use their level 1 is a very, very important kit of utility. Right, so that's why Mr. Negative, number 5. Number 4, and I'm not as confident some people will be with this placement. Spot number 4, I am placing Spider-Man 2099. I have had a ton of discussions. I have not had the most experience with Spider-Man 2099, but I have had a ton of discussions with many different people in regards of this champion specifically, who swear by him, who live by him. And for most people, the obvious answer is clear. Spider-Man 2099 is pretty much the best Alliance War boss killer now. Because he takes 75% reduced damage as long as opponent has true strike and true accuracy. And realistically, there aren't many champions who have those buffs active in their base. But every Alliance War boss will have true strike active. And that makes this guy very powerful. But that was the initial push that this champion needed to be kind of like purely discovered in all that he can do. And it turns out that he can do a ton of things. It turns out that he's much better than myself and most people initially gave him credit for, with being one of the 2 champions in the game that can never gain a buff, with the ability to pause personal debuffs for, fairly significant amount of time every time you would gain a buff. And then on top of that, you have very potent power control abilities on your heavy attack and especially on your level 2. And that level 3 is, extra. I don't think that level 3 is all that great, to be honest, or all that needed. Typically, the fights go to level 2 and level 1 and level 2 kind of thing. But he's doing his job well. I hope that this is not me giving him too much credit. I hope that he maintains his position. But right now, the champion is riding a very big high from a ton of supporters, and a ton of people are absolutely in love with the guy. And I'm not quite there yet, but I can definitely see why. And there we are. Spider-Man currently is going to go to spot number 4. Not 100% on this placement, but I think that's where he belongs right now. And spot number 3 now. Spot number 3 is going to be Mr. Fantastic. Hate me, don't hate me. He's that good. He really, really is that good. All that I needed were final proofs when I was testing 7.4, and he just destroyed pretty much every single time I brought him in. He was one of my MVPs for 7.3 as well. He's one of the most valuable Alliance War champions right now. And I have made multiple videos about why Mr. Fantastic is as good as he is. I recommend you check him out. I didn't see him getting that buff, and that buff that he gained might not have been absolutely game-breaking, but it did give him that extra edge by increasing the debuff duration, by increasing the damage and everything else. He can do a ton of damage, but that's not the key point of Mr. Fantastic. I'm not even going to talk about all of the amazing things that come from having his pre-fights and having his synergies, because he has loads of great synergies, and he has extremely useful pre-fights and can significantly enhance a ton of champions in the game that rely on debuffs, for instance. Speaking just about Mr. Fantastic, and I'm going to be trying to kind of like go over some of the more understated bits of utility. Number 1 is going to be evade. In any fight that has lasted longer than a couple of level, 2s, you're going to have, not guaranteed, but very, very high chance to evade incoming attacks. That means even when you will get smacked in the face, chances are you're going to evade out of it on 2nd or 3rd hit. That's very important. Second thing is that your attack rating is increased for each debuff on the opponent that does not specify debuffs from you. So there will be plenty of nodes that will let you increase your attack rating, quite stupid ratings, because of those nodes where they place additional debuffs on the opponent. You have somewhat increased physical and energy resistance. That is not the most important thing necessarily. However, moving on, let's discuss his Awakened ability and his Suppression debuff, where you can basically make it so that opponent hardly gains any power by being struck. You can literally fill 3 power bars by the time opponent fills a bar with their power. So he has extremely powerful combat power control. On top of that, with the Petrify, you can stack 3 of them and you can reduce their healing very quickly and very easily. But with the 6-star champion, you can also reverse their power gain. And at a time where they hardly gain any power by being struck and their ability power gain is reversed, you have absolutely locked those opponents in. Moving on, the debuff Siphoner that often gets overlooked reduces damage over time effects by 25%. So with 3 stacks of these, you reduce the potency of damage over time effects by 75%, which often is enough to let your willpower healing overtake any damage over time effects that you take. Now, it obviously does not work necessarily as a full-on immunity. However, it does help you incredibly in a ton of matchups where Immune Champion might have been preferred, but Mr. Fantastic still can get through very healthy. And in plenty of matchups that will actually enable you to heal up as well. Then moving on. You have access to Taunt and Stagger, which is not a common thing for Science Champions. Ability to stagger opponents' buffs for a Science Champion is extremely potent and powerful and rare. And obviously, Taunt, who doesn't like Taunt? Taunt's awesome. Then you have access to Shock, which is great, and Special 3 is much, much more damage. I don't think I have missed much here. I hope I haven't. But fact of the matter is now, people who have given this champion a chance have not regretted it. I don't regret it, and I genuinely think that he's one of the top Science Champions in the game, and it's not even close. A lot of people have asked me advice about Mr. Fantastic, and I have tried my best to guide them, and every single person who ended up ranking Mr. Fantastic after my recommendations has come back saying that they are happy. And I agree with them. I ranked 3 my Mr. Fantastic, even at a moderately low sig. I think my Mr. Fantastic now is 660. And he has been putting in so much work. Only way this guy could have gotten better is if he actually would be Liquid Courage double-edge friendly. That would be like cherry on top. But okay, let's move on to top 2. I still think Captain America Infinity War is the second best Science Champion in the game right now. The dude just works. I have spoken about this guy time and time again. There's impossible not to respect his kit at this point. I do think that in order for me to rely on this champion, I want him at SIG 200. I do not recommend people rank up necessarily this guy unawakened. I think if you're going to rank him up, you need to get him awakened and you need to give him all the 6 tons that you have. But when it comes to utility pieces, then you have guaranteed ability to purify all incoming debuffs as long as you have your kinetic charges, right? The fact that you can make it guaranteed chance means that you can use it against damage over time effects, against biohazard, against a ton of different nodes. That is absolutely excellent. Love that incredibly useful piece of kit. Now you have ability to inflict weakness debuffs if you have Science Champions. You have ability to inflict armor breaks, which are becoming increasingly more important again in the game. And you obviously have the ability to inflict petrifies, and with the combination of Despair Mastery, you can reverse opponent's healing extremely efficiently, extremely quickly, without needing to actually land a single hit on them, which also is quite important. It's one of the best heal reversal champions specifically in the game. Many champions who have access to Petrify do better job reversing power gain. It's much harder and much trickier to do with Captain America Infinity War, but when it comes specifically to heal reversal, I'd say Captain America Infinity War is one of the, if not the best champion. Definitely, towards the top of heal reversal. Then moving on, obviously, when he's unawakened, you still can deal with unstoppable buffs like a boss super effectively. Furthermore, you do have access still to bleed and to relatively big amounts of damage on your level 2s and whatnot. And then there are just happenstance good things about this champion, like the fact that he lands his entire heavy attack within the duration of his parry stun, which means that, you can bypass worrying about evade abilities and plenty of other nasty abilities by just doing parry heavy playstyle. Moving on, he has extremely solid base stats, namely the block proficiency. The perfect parries are still a very, very, very big deal to be grateful for. And then the last thing is, the man has an incredible list of synergies that all can be extremely helpful in helping him basically adjust and overcome even more weird and different situations in the game. I do think that Captain America Infinity War overall, when it comes to science class and to, even champions in game in general, there are not many more champions in this game than Captain America Infinity War that has been phenomenal for pretty much every single piece of content you actually end up using him. In between his perfect parries, in between his versatility, he has been solid in, I don't know, Act 5, Act 6, Act 7. I've seen people use him plenty in Alliance War. I've seen people use this guy in Alliance Quest as well if need be. It's slightly harder in Alliance War and Alliance Quest because you're gonna be unable to bring in, like, you know, full set of different class champions. But in general, Captain America Infinity War is one of those champions that's always effective and always puts in work. And I think he's the second best science champion. And on top right now, I think is, where is the Johnny Blaze? No, but Human Torch. Human Torch is still, in my opinion, the best science champion. And initially, he didn't seem necessarily as promising. You know, most of the community kind of thought that he's a bit of a dud. And I want to make it perfectly clear. Those people were not right, but there were reasons why initially Human Torch did not seem as impressive as he truly was. One of the bigger reasons was because he was quite squishy, and there were far too more matchups where it was harder to use Human Torch because opponent attack ratings were significantly higher. That changed after Act 6 got reworked, and Act 7 did not include those attack ratings anymore. On top of that, we have far more champions added to the game now that inflict energy damage, or how energy hits, basically, especially if you look at 2021. Deals energy damage, I think deals energy damage, deals incinerates and energy damage. So we can see that it's energy damage here. I think that's just a mystic, you know, so you're going to get charged up anyways. Then we have Penny Parker, who ramped him up incredibly quickly. Then we have Strife with energy damage, Silver Centurion with energy damage. Basically, at this point, every other, or let's say 1 out of 3 champions that get added to the game deal energy damage on their base hits, and even more champions do it on special attacks. And this guy covers majority of those champions, and obviously also the champions who have energy on their specials, and all mystics. So thanks to a very huge increase in amount of champions that just give these guys all the smolders in the world, is one of the biggest reasons for his immense claim to fame. I think what finalized it the most was Abyss, because Abyss is another piece of content where Human Torch absolutely shines. I'd say that he's most important Horseman of Abyss, because out of all the Horsemen, he's the one that actually solos most of his fights. Almost all of the fights where you end up using Human Torch, you can solo. Be that Morningstar, Ghost Rider, Human Mephisto, or Mordo, or Loki. If you're going up against a Mystic champion, or a champion where you're meant to use Human Torch, you can get in that solo. The reason why Human Torch is as good as he is in Abyss is because opponents' attacks there are relatively low. They're actually pretty much lower than Labyrinth of Legends. So the fact that Kabam moved away from super inflated attack values, and we received an absolute ton of champions that deal energy damage, and obviously we kept receiving more Mystic champions, just meant the fact that it became easier to use Human Torch in more and more fights. To a point that right now, a very significant percentage of the champions in the game are very good matchups for Human Torch. And when he starts getting his smolders, then obviously it becomes a non-issue to try and maintain high temperature, and your damage can just go up to quite ridiculous levels. Obviously, he still benefits from the fact that he's a champion that can easily inflict plenty of debuffs just by basic attacks. He's a champion that's Incinerate and Cold Snap immune, that also has its uses. And there are more useful things about Human Torch, like how he bypasses Miss. Therefore, as Miss gets more popular, so does Human Torch. For instance, he's fantastic Professor X counter. But he's a champion that definitely has not necessarily had the best start in the game, the most appreciated start, but he's just growing stronger and stronger right now, because there are more and more matchups where he can absolutely obliterate the opponents. And that is the reason why I think he's currently the best science champion in the game. The reason why I do not see Quake included in this list, by the way, is because I'm not including champions that are not out as 6 stars. There aren't too many of those left, but for science class, Quake is one of the one. That is about it. I do think that science class is probably my personal favorite class. There are many more champions that I would want to talk about that I didn't in today's video that I think are actually quite awesome. Like, I think Luke Cage is quite awesome. It's going to be very interesting to try him out with a new offensive tactic at some point. Still think Spider-Gwen is great. Absolutely hate Gladiator Hulk. I hope, I don't know, they delete him. And I can't wait for more of the science champions to be reworked. And potentially it's going to be interesting to see what Anti-Venom does once he becomes more available. Wasp is still awesome. Didn't mind Yellow Jacket buff. I think out of all the classes in the game, science is kind of like best balanced in a sense that there is not a huge amount of champions that do like one specific thing, but science class in general does most of the things that you would need in the game. If I would have to play with one class champions in the game, that would be science class. I know mutants are shinier, and I know cosmics have more damage. I'd pick science champions because they answer the most amount of problems, in my opinion. Anyways, that is it for top 10 science champion video. So again, I'm going to go over very, very quickly here. So spot number 10 was Thing. Spot number 9 was Immortal Abomination. Spot number 8 was Miles Morales. Spot number 7 was iHulk. Spot number 6 was Void. Spot number 5 was Mr. Negative. Spot number 4 was Spider-Man 2099. Spot number 3 was Mr. Fantastic. Spot number 2 was Captain America Infinity War. And spot number 1 is Human Torch. Let me know what you guys think, and I'm going to catch you guys soon. See ya.
Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about